mode.
Good afternoon, ready class of 2016. My name is Jason Gray, and over the next 45 minutes or so, I will present some data highlights for rural North Carolina that will give you some context for your session next week. This is a highly abbreviated presentation, and there is far more I can share with you. I will be available off and on through the 3 sessions, and in fact, I think I am now scheduled to be on the agenda for a little bit for questions on Tuesday afternoon. Between now and then, I am easily accessible by phone and email, and I'll have that contact information for you at the end of the presentation. What this webinar is going to cover, let's see, I need to get to full screen here. What this webinar is going to cover is four topic areas. First, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about how we define rural and the rural life. Then we will spend some time talking about rural North Carolina today. Who are we? What's happening to our economy? Third, rural North Carolina tomorrow. What are the drivers of change? And we have some indicators of change with some level of uncertainty based on what's going to be happening to the job mix we have and what's happening to us demographically, and then a little bit more conviction around some policy drivers that we think are going to work for rural North Carolina. And then finally, I want to spend a few minutes giving you an introduction to the Rural Data Almanac, which is a little guidebook, an informal guidebook we've put together of the most useful and most accessible data sources to be found on the internet. Okay, so defining the rural life. There are 3 major takeaways here that I want to leave you with. One, that there are many definitions of rural for different needs. 2, we have to be careful when you hear rural defined as non-metro. And then 3, rural is not only defined by density, but also by culture and connection. First off, here's a map of North Carolina that comes from the Rural Center's website. The 80 counties the North Carolina Rural Center counts as rural are here in green. The rural counties, we define rural as any county that has an average population density of 250 people per square mile or less. There are a lot of different definitions of rural out there. We have used this one for some years, and we find it to be very simple and quite practical. Up until 2015, we would have said that the other 20 counties in North Carolina were all urban. But when we took a closer look at them, we really saw that there was a great deal of distinction between the 6 core urban counties, which have very high population density, say over 750 on up to almost 2,000 people per square mile, and the 14 suburban and regional city counties that make up the balance. Naturally, the suburbanizing counties are around our urban core, regional cities here in Asheville, Fayetteville, and Greenville. So this is how we see rural, but it is not how the rest of the nation sees rural. And so it's worth pointing out that there are really 3 major categories of how rural definitions get made. One is a programmatic classification of where state or federal funding agencies set eligibility criteria for rural to allocate grants and loans. For example, within the United States Department of Agriculture, there are at least, by my last count, 10 or so different definitions that different programs use to define their eligibility for rural counties. But the 2 major divisions at the federal level are whether rural gets defined by separation or by connection. The U.S. Census Bureau defines rural as whatever is not urban, and they have a threshold of density that a census tract is defined as being urbanized, and that which is not urban is therefore rural. So it's a density based definition. But the contrasting definition is done by the Federal Office of Management and Budget, and it does this with its metropolitan, non-metropolitan designation. Counties get clustered based on their economic connections. A rural county is considered metropolitan if 25% of its employment base commutes to work in a core metro county. So, for example, here's a map of metropolitan and non-metropolitan counties in North Carolina. Metropolitan counties being the brown, non-metro green. But we have 26 counties that the Rural Center considers rural, which are part of metropolitan regions. These are these dark brown counties here. And under the OMB definition of the default metropolitan, non-metropolitan, that has over time become equal to urban and rural. Non-metropolitan equals rural. And so when you see national statistics about rural from the federal government, they often mean non-metropolitan. And that leaves out these 26 counties we consider rural. For example, here's Jones County. Jones County has a population density of around 26 people per square mile. That's really rural. If you were to drive around the county, you see farmland, you see a lot of woodlands, you see some swamps, you see very small towns. You look around and you say, yeah, that's rural. But by many policymakers at the federal level using the non-metro equals rural definition, that would not be rural. And that makes no sense. Even if there is some economic connection to, in this case, with Craven County, which New Bern is a small metropolitan region. So we like to say that if the countryside is rural and the population densities are low, you can be a rural place and have this connection to an urbanized area. So the question I would leave you with on this is that how do you know you're rural? What are the internal benchmarks that you use that when you look around a community or your community and you say, yep, this is a rural community. It's not suburban and it's not urban. So, and no doubt each of you have a number of ways to define that. For me, when I'm out in a rural area, and if it's a clear night, if I can see stars, then I say I'm in a rural area. Or if I see folks out with their dogs and they don't have them on a leash, that's a rural area. Because certainly in the cities, it's hard to get away doing that. So I just want to end this section with emphasizing that we can have all these formal definitions, but rural folks have their own standards around connection to community and to place and to culture, which defines rurality, and that's hard to get captured in a formal definition used by a state or federal government. Rural can also be defined by how it gets classified for different research purposes, and I just want to highlight very quickly these four maps: non-specialized counties, federal and state government-dependent counties, manufacturing-dependent counties, and recreation-dependent counties. These are all classifications used by the Economic Research Service of USDA for their own research purposes. And I use this classification in some economic data I'm going to show you in just a few slides. Okay, so let's shift now and talk about rural North Carolina today. And so there are three takeaways I would leave you with. First, that economic restructuring and decline is a long-term condition that dramatically accelerated in the Great Recession for rural North Carolina. Two, structural change, when major economic sectors change at the national or global level. It is a major reason why many rural counties continue to lag in the economic recovery. Manufacturing losses play a significant role here in this. Three, that despite the loss of manufacturing jobs, rural North Carolina has lost over 300,000 manufacturing jobs between 2000 and 2014, though we've had a recovery of late. Even with that, manufacturing remains a critical part of the rural economy. It won't be like the past, but can still be a big part of the future. So let's talk about the rural population. Who are we? I mean, who are we racially and by ethnic composition? This data comes from the Census Bureau for 2014, and you'll see that 68% of the rural population is white, non-Hispanic. And when I say white non-Hispanic or black non-Hispanic, um, it's a good way to point out that we have these racial classifications, but Hispanic, Latino is an ethnic designation. That is, somebody of any race can be Latino. Uh, and that kind of confuses people at times, and so we've corrected this data to highlight the white non-Hispanic, black non-Hispanic, which has remained steady at about 20% of the population, 2% American Indian, and 8% Hispanic. And the Hispanic population has grown considerably. Um, Over the past 20 years in rural North Carolina, as it has in North Carolina generally. And this has added a lot of diversity to our rural areas. It's added a lot of new economic opportunities, and we see this as a tremendous asset. While others makes up only 3% of the total population of rural North Carolina, it's worth highlighting what do we mean by others, and it's a pity just to give them this catch-all of others. But here we have both Asian populations and in particular multiracial, those who in the census identify themselves of being of more than one race. And we see this growth is quite significant in our urban areas. And has been for the past 10, 15 years. We're now beginning to see this show up in our rural communities. So we're more diverse than ever, and will become even more so as the years go on. Um, I want to skip over this slide and come back to it. It's actually I've got it a little bit out of order, but I can come back to that in a second. Um, Rural education metrics. Rural educational attainment is improving. We've got 32% who have a high school degree, 32% who have either an associate's degree or some college, and 17% who have a bachelor's degree or higher. I would note that the percentage with an associate's degree or some college has grown considerably in rural North Carolina over the past 10 years. When the Great Recession hit in December of 2007, and our unemployment rates started to skyrocket, many folks who lost their jobs went into the community college system to retool, and the data shows that pretty well, and that's a good thing. 17% have a bachelor's degree or higher, though it's important to point out is that rural folks can a higher percentage of that of rural folks can actually be obtaining a bachelor's degree, but their job opportunities are taking them into an urbanized area. So we have an improving situation here on this, but we've got more to go to really be as competitive of rural places as we can, and we'll see this in a little bit of data I'm going to review momentarily. Okay, on rural poverty and near poverty. In rural North Carolina, 788,000 people are in poverty. This is about 20% of the total population. This is from 2014 census estimates. Um, we have an additional 489,000 people who have incomes between 100 and 150% of poverty income. Now, many federal programs will define their eligibility up to 200% of poverty income. Low to moderate incomes is what they would call it. So this 100 to 150% of the poverty rate is a little narrower slice of really highlighting that we've got a significant population that officially is not in poverty by the fairly limited definitions that the federal government uses of poverty. So, but we've got folks who are working, in many cases, working more than one job, but individually or as a family or as a household, their income is not over that 150% of the poverty rate. And what this generally means is that they're barely able to hold their heads above water. They may be working, but they're unable to save assets. They're unable to save for a down payment on a home. They're unable to save to pay for medical deductions. or insurance, or they're unable to save for a child's college savings account. So this is a special part of the population we need to pay attention to, as well as those who are in poverty. Taken together, nearly 33% of rural North Carolina's population is either in poverty or just above it. Rural poverty through a racial and ethnic framework is also complex. The white non-Hispanic poverty rate is 14%. The Hispanic Latino poverty rate is 38%. For African Americans, 32%. Native Americans for 32%. So there's a tremendous differential between whites and communities of color in rural North Carolina in terms of poverty rates. That said, it's important to remember that while the rural white poverty rate is low relative to others, whites still make up nearly half of the rural poor in North Carolina. And I highlight this because at the state and certainly at the national level, when we talk about poverty, either intentionally or unintentionally, we almost always frame it as being only an issue in communities of color. And certainly, as the numbers say here, the percentages are much higher. But when you look at the total population in poverty, there are a lot of white people who are poor. And in our policy discussions, we sometimes forget that. So just wanted to highlight that. Okay, so I found a couple slides recently from a legislative presentation done by the Fiscal Research Division of the General Assembly. I'm sharing them here because I think they give a good overview of what's happened economically in North Carolina since 1995. So this graphic here shows the general GDP growth from year to year percentage. The horizontal line here is the average over the period. Last half of the 1990s, we had great growth in North Carolina. We had a brief recession in early 2001, late 2000, that saw GDP decline. Finally recovered, 2004, starting to recover strongly, and then the Great Recession hit. And look at this plunge. And then the slow recovery climbing out of it, started to get to recovery, and then we had a little bit of a lag in 2013, and now is beginning to climb back up to above the average. So, and when you look at this for income, for wages and salaries, again, you see a similar but accentuated pattern of good growth at the national and in North Carolina wages in the last half of the 1990s, a dip with the recession in the early part of the 2000s, but the recovery initially didn't climb back above the state average over the period until 2006, and was there for only a year or so when the Great Recession hit. And look at the slide again. What a roller coaster. And we've begun to recover on wages and salaries, but it hasn't been at the strength that we have for GDP. So, and this is certainly a national phenomenon. We are now growing jobs, but we are not growing them at a rate fast enough, or we're not getting the income growth to go with it. And that's what brings me back to this earlier slide I need to come back to here. Okay, so this is the percentage change in employment from December of 2014 to December of 2015. And we focus here on employment rather than the unemployment rate. Now, why is that? The unemployment rate, commonly gets cited. It's the most commonly used economic indicator for communities and for the state and the nation. The unemployment rate has dropped to 4% or 5%, or it's up to 11%. But it's a complex estimate, really, because the unemployment rate has two important variables that can change a great deal. It's the size of the labor force, and it's the number of people who are unemployed and who are looking for work and who are registered by the state as looking for work. So you can have a situation where you're growing a lot of new jobs, but if your labor force has grown dramatically, um, you're still going to have that percentage be a bit lower. Likewise, if for example, several years ago now, the state of North Carolina changed the regulations on the period of eligibility for unemployment insurance. It was contracted significantly. So, and when that happened, well, those folks were no longer on officially registered as looking for work. If they were still out of work, and we saw an immediate drop in the unemployment rate. Um, but we want to focus on the actual change in the number of people employed, because that's a hard number that's not influenced by any other kind of external variable. So when we look at this map here, we see that we had 15 counties over this 1 year period that still had a net reduction in employment, clustered here in the Northeast. Where'd my pointer go? In the Northeast, a little downturn here in Wilson County. I think that was probably due to some manufacturing employment loss. A little bit here in Sampson County, in the cluster counties here in the central western mountains. I think this is McDowell, and then the case where it was hardest hit was here in Graham County, and that's I'm pretty certain is due to the reduction in employment in the major private employer in the county, which is a furniture company. But we saw good growth, say here in Robinson County, and pretty good growth through the western Piedmont counties. So that's where we are today on that. We've had a good recovery in the state that has picked up over the past year. Overall unemployment rate has been dropping, though I just saw the January numbers, and the rate was flat, even though we had some employment growth. But my point here again is to highlight that we've got a number of rural counties where the economic recovery has really not taken hold. Much of our economic growth has been concentrated in core urban counties, particularly here in the Charlotte area and in the Triangle. So let me come on back up here to where I'm supposed to be. So this graphic here is from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and it's looking at wage and salary employment over time from 2000 to 2014, and we've broken this out by the three major county classifications we use. The blue line are the urban counties, the green line is rural, red line are the 14 regional city and suburban counties, and this is the number of employees. Naturally, for the rural counties, there's 80 counties here. There's only 14 in the regional city and suburban county classification, and only 8 here in the urban counties. But note the concentration of jobs overall in the urban counties. Also note that, again, we're showing here the little bit of the dip from the first recession, some recovery. Recovery was stronger in the urban counties through the middle of the decade before the Great Recession. You see here, it just had a little blip of a recovery from the first to the second recession. Likewise, when in our regional city and suburban counties. But what's really worth noting is what's happened since the end of the Great Recession, which was late 2009, early 2010. The wage and salary jobs increased at a really good pace in our core urban counties. They've had just a very limited recovery in our rural counties, and a little bit better recovery in our 14 regional city and suburban counties. So, and again, this is reflective that so much of our employment growth in recent years has been in our core urban areas. So we see that with employees. What do we see with average wages for salaried workers? It's a somewhat similar picture, but one that's worrisome. Um, the average wages in our urban counties are much higher because there's a much greater concentration of both high technology and medical professionals and universities. So the wage levels are generally much higher in these 6 urban counties. And so rural folks shouldn't beat themselves up as much about that because it's just economically they're a different animal, and we can't always benefit or help ourselves by comparing ourselves to urban. In the future, we'll do a little bit more of comparing rural to rural in a number of different ways. But what is worrisome is looking at what's happened uh, since the Great Recession. We've seen some recovery of wages, some growth in wages in our urban counties. It's been fairly flat in the regional city and suburban counties, and quite flat, if not declining, in our 80 rural counties. And this is a point of great concern. Again, it's a national issue, but it's particularly a rural issue for North Carolina. Um, Unemployment rates are beginning to come down, but we have absolutely got to look at strategies that not only just create jobs, but are increasing jobs in industries that pay a growing wage. And we need to have the educational capacity. We need the trained workforce that can compete and attract those higher paying jobs. So this table I want to spend a few minutes on because it tells a bit of a story. It's not 100% of the story, but it's one I think worth spending time with. Um, what I've done is assign the U.S. Economic Research Service economic typologies, which I quickly ran through on the maps earlier of non-specialized counties. These are counties that whose employment base is diverse enough that it's not dominated by a single sector, to farm-dependent counties. In agriculture, we've only got 3 of these nationally. Manufacturing-dependent counties, we have a number of them across the state. Used to have a lot more. I think we still have 16 or 17 rural counties who have over 20% of their employment base in manufacturing. That's compared to a national average of about 8%. So while we've lost a lot of manufacturing jobs, we still have a lot of counties where manufacturing matters a great deal. State and federal employment-dependent counties, these are counties with military installations. It could be a county with a state university, or as we see in some cases in rural North Carolina, with a major state mental health facility or a state or federal prison facility. And then finally, we have recreation-dependent counties. These are counties, with one exception, are concentrated either on the coast or out in the mountains. So what I did is that I got the typology, and we got every county assigned what this economic typologies were. We then sorted the BEA wage and salary employment data I showed you earlier. I sorted them out into quartiles to see uh, where the mix of the different types of counties were in the various quartiles. In these quartiles, it's worth noting that only in the top quartile did we see employment growth overall in the quartile. When we look at percentage change in average salary, it was a 3% decline in the bottom quartile, 0.4% in the second, 4% growth in the third quartile. Interesting, we still had a little bit of employment decline in the quartile, but we saw some income growth in it, and then 5% growth in average salary in the top quartile that also saw the percentage change, the strong percentage change in employment. Okay, so what's interesting to note here is that in the bottom 2 quartiles, we saw a higher concentration of manufacturing-dependent counties. Um, we we see a range of state and federal employment-dependent counties across the 4 quartiles, but it's worth noting here that in the top quartile, 3 of these 5 counties have state universities. Elizabeth City State University in Pasquotank, Appalachian State University in Watauga, and Western Carolina University in Jackson County. Um, Most of these other counties here, these were one is a federal government that is Craven County with the Marine Corps Air Base. The rest are counties where there's a significant state or federal uh, prison facility presence. In addition to the economic typologies, USDA also does a number of what they would call policy typologies. For example, I have here low educational attainment. They have also a typology around chronic poverty and a few others. But I thought it would be interesting to add the low education attainment classification in on all the counties. And what we see in the bottom quartile is that 8 of the 20 counties were designated as low educational attainment. Now we also get a little bit of a higher percentage here in the third quartile, but when we get to the top quartile, it's only one county. Um, so there's a little bit of a trend there, so that we know that the loss of manufacturing jobs and that low educational attainment is a factor that affects us economically. I think if you think about your own communities in this way, you might come up with some other indicators to suggest of how your county compares to other places, and that's a conversation worth having. Um, I've highlighted in a couple different ways the role of manufacturing in North Carolina. We think of rural as being agricultural, and certainly that's the case. It's that natural landscape, it's that working landscapes, and that certainly defines rural nationally and as part of our cultural heritage of being rural in North Carolina. But since the early 1950s, basic branch plant manufacturing, chiefly in tobacco and textiles and furniture, has been a key part of the rural economy. And and I mentioned earlier that since 2000, the state of North Carolina has lost about 310,000 manufacturing jobs. Um, but even with that shakeout, we still see a significant presence: 460,000 jobs statewide, 197,000 manufacturing jobs in rural North Carolina. But what's really important are the following couple numbers. So the percentage of total employment in manufacturing is 14.6% in rural North Carolina compared to only 8.7% in urban North Carolina. So there's quite a quite a concentration of employment still in rural manufacturing in North Carolina. And again, the national average I think is about 8.5%. Um, so there is that dependence there. Uh, but the reality is also is that manufacturing wages pay a higher average wage than any other kind of uh, private non-manufacturing employment. For example, so the average wage in rural North Carolina in manufacturing was 43,000. For average annual private wage, excluding manufacturing, it was a little under 30,000. Now there are higher paying jobs out there. For example, in nursing, there's a great demand for nurses all across the state, including rural areas, and rural nurses can be paid quite well. But taken as a whole, when you look at private employment, manufacturing, as they say, punches above its weight, and this has a multiplier throughout a rural economy. So the rural manufacturing wage is 144% of the overall private non-manufacturing wage in North Carolina. So I just highlight this to say that our manufacturing sector is no longer the low skill, low wage industry that it was in total. Now, granted, in the clusters like animal um, uh, processing, the manufacturing wages are fairly low, and we've got some other data to show that, and hopefully I'll have some time to review that with you at a later time. But in total, manufacturing wages and manufacturing jobs count a great deal in rural North Carolina. Okay, I want to move on now to talking about what are some of the trends we're seeing going forward. So there are three takeaways I would offer. One, that the technology and economic globalization will accelerate change. There will be opportunities and disruptions. Uh, Globalization, we've lost manufacturing to overseas companies, though I would suggest that outside of the cut and sew apparel manufacturing sector, most of the manufacturing jobs lost in North Carolina have been due to technology, not through globalization. Um, Second point, based on demographic analysis alone, rural North Carolina will gain nearly 500,000 residents between 2010 and 2035. But this growth is highly concentrated in a few counties. 29 counties are projected to lose population between 20 and 2035. Uh, but three, that demography is not destiny. Rural North Carolina can have more control of its future by relentlessly focusing on six transformative strategies. And I use the word relentlessly quite deliberately. And I need to take a sip of water so my enunciation improves. Um, so let's review for a moment the impact of technology on employment and unemployment. So many of you know of the Institute for Emerging Issues at NC State University, and that annually they do a major conference which sort of looks at major trends that's going to affect North Carolina over the years. This year's session had the theme of future work, and it focused on this issue of how is technology going to either provide economic opportunity or be an economic threat. And the message was very mixed on the part of their speakers. Some of their speakers had great conviction that new technology was going to provide a great opportunities. Others were more pessimistic. Um, IEI themselves ran some data with some assistance of the economist Mike Walden at NC State University on the 39 most vulnerable occupations in the state. And what was the impact of technology going to be on these occupations over time? So they generated some data on that. I took the data and sorted it out by the county typologies, and that what we see in the 80 rural counties, that between now and 2040, we're going to lose 25% of our jobs. This is 361,000, almost 362,000 jobs in these 39 occupations, with a cumulative total lost wages of $9.3 billion. The numbers are actually a little worse in the urban counties in terms of percentages. But I share this data with some trepidation. No data is perfect, um, and this data, while slightly illuminating, is does not tell the full story of what kind of new jobs will be created through technological change. I mean, their analysis didn't take that into account. But I think what I would certainly agree with them, and I want you to know that whatever these numbers are, that we're going to continue to lose jobs to technological change. I mean, it's been a reality for 100 years, and it'll likely accelerate into the future. And up until now, the job loss has been in blue collar jobs, in that textile mill, in that furniture factory. But there is good reason to believe that technology is going to start eating into white collar jobs. And as a father of sons who are, one of whom is in college, the other still in high school, I worry about this a little bit. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't worry about it either, but I wouldn't freak out over these numbers to be direct on that. So let's move into population projections. So the next couple maps come from the state demographer's office in the North Carolina Office of state budget and management. So we're seeing a trend from 2010 to 2035, a population loss here in the Northeast, along our southern tier sandhill counties, a little bit here in the Virginia border counties here, and in the western foothill counties. Tremendous population growth here in the Triangle, in the Charlotte area, and in the southern coastal counties. Up here in Camden, Pasquotank counties, very strong growth as well, and they're really being integrated into the Norfolk and Virginia Beach metropolitan regions. So but the numbers we see is at 29. There are 29 counties here that are projected to lose population. Some of them will lose just a very small amount. Others it'll be larger. Another way to look at this that I think is quite important for rural North Carolina, and as we'll see for all of North Carolina, is around uh, our aging population. In 2010, 18% of rural North Carolina was age 65 or older. Only 12% for the regional city and suburban counties, and only 8% in our urban counties. So rural North Carolina is older now, but we're going to see a trend of everywhere in the state, the aging, the 65 plus population being a much bigger percentage of the population. So hang on to your hat, because I'm going to show you July 2035. And here, the percentage 65 and older in rural counties goes up 5 percentage points to 23%, but it goes up 10 percentage points in our urban counties. So you'll see much higher percentage of older populations in our coastal counties, some counties here in our northeast, and pretty consistently across our western counties, and as well as overall across the state. So, but it's important here to point out that different communities age in different ways. In our more interior eastern and Piedmont rural counties, people are aging in place. Okay, so what that means is people who grew up there are getting old there, but they're seeing out migration of youth and young adults. So as a percentage of total population, they're a bigger part of the pie. But in a number of our coastal counties and in a number of our western counties, we have their retirement destinations. So you have older folks who are moving into those communities, and demographically they have a little bit different makeup. They tend to be a bit wealthier, for example. Um, so so whether this happens in this precise number, it is a reality that rural North Carolina is going to have to address the fact that we're getting older. And what does that mean in terms of our economic development strategies? What does it mean in terms of social services? What does it mean in terms of rural counties that have retirement populations moving in, of tapping the assets that those older rural residents now have? So there can be some opportunities to go along with this, but this is unquestionably going to be a major driver for the future of rural North Carolina. So I've shared with you some economic and demographic information, which has a level of uncertainty to it. I want to shift now to what I think is the good news we can be certain about, and this is highlighting some of the strategies that the Rural Center is going to be rolling out in April around policy strategies that we are going to push for and advocate for at the federal and state level. And we think that these are also strategies to be taken seriously in the community level. And we are very confident that if communities, as I said in the beginning of this section, relentlessly push on these policy drivers, you will maximize the opportunities that you can make your community better. No community is immune to global change, and rural communities are particularly vulnerable to forces outside their control. But we're not helpless either. And we think that these strategies and some others can make a difference. And I just want to end this part of the conversation just by highlighting this. So the 6R, vigorously advocate for innovation in education and workforce development. Formerly, people could lead a middle class life with fairly low educational attainment skills. Those days are now long gone. And we've got to inculcate a culture of lifelong learning and adaptation of new skills in order to take advantage of new opportunities. We need to expand accessible and affordable high-speed fiber broadband. And we're being very specific about noting fiber because fiber infrastructure is getting rolled out significantly in our urban areas. And if we don't do it in our rural communities, we're going to be at a competitive disadvantage. So this is an important infrastructure issue. 3, we have to invest in stronger entrepreneurship and small business development systems. We've got rural North Carolina is characterized by strong self-employment numbers, tradition of small businesses. The state has a pretty good support network for entrepreneurship and small businesses, but is it equal to the challenge and to the opportunities we have? We would say we need to push a good deal harder on this. So, and you'll be hearing a great deal more about this as the center rolls into its policy advocacy strategies next month. We need to press on both old and new agricultural opportunities. And by old opportunities, I mean simply growing the ability of farmers and commercial fishermen and others to sell their product at a fair price, to connect to urban markets where there is high demand. But it is also in new agricultural opportunities in biotechnology. Today, the day I'm recording this, it's the election day. We're voting on the bond referendum, which has a very strong biotechnology and food manufacturing uh, um, uh, core focus in the $2 billion bond package. So while these projects are going to get built and mostly in the case of these within NC State here in Raleigh, it's going to have a tremendous impact across rural North Carolina. Finally, we've got to really think differently and work harder about how we do the work, and that is we have to have the regional collaborations and partnerships. Our communities cannot go it alone. Doesn't mean you have to be best friends with the neighboring counties whose football team and basketball team plays your community in the league, but we have to be far more deliberate and far more energetic about looking for these commonalities to work together to get the economies of scale to make good things happen. Um, so these are the 6 I would say that if your community is really working, pushing hard on all of them, your chances of doing better in the future are going to be considerably greater than those communities who don't do this or they're just sort of sleepwalking through it. So there are forces outside of our control, but there are many, many ways for a community to take control of its own future. And I know you believe that, and you wouldn't be participating in this year's Ready class if you didn't. So hats off to you. So I want to end now with my remaining time, which is getting limited because I'm already at 45 minutes, in talking about the World Center Data Almanac. Before the internet, television, and radio, our grandparents and great-grandparents often turned to the Farmer's Almanac for essential information. Now, that information was not altogether reliable. And we live in a different world today where there's a lot of information out there where it's almost like a fire hose. And the data in the Rural Center's Data Almanac gives you the center's best direction for online data sources that are relatively easy to access and provide reliable and useful data for rural leaders. It is far more reliable than the Farmer's Almanac. You'll get this data almanac when you come next week. We've updated it, and just for now, I want to walk through one section through it, and it's important because I have it on good authority that you're actually going to have a little bit of a homework assignment based around that. So I want to introduce you to the American Fact Finder for you to test drive. Okay, the United States Census Bureau American Fact Finder. If you put this URL into your favorite browser, you will come up with this page. Now, isn't this a lovely family? It just makes me smile every time I come to the site. I always smile when I come to the site because I like to dig out data. But this family here is icing on the cake. So we're going to use the example of for this exercise of the town of Maysville, North Carolina. You can enter in Maysville or your own community or county, but you would enter it in here. And if it's a county, you would say Jones County, and if it's a town, you would say Maysville town. And you'll likely get a pull down menu of choices because, believe it or not, there's more than one Maysville across the United States, though I'm pretty certain none of them are as nice as Maysville, North Carolina. So you get Maysville or your community entered into here and just hit go. And when that happens, you'll come here. Now, this is the portal for the American Fact Finder that can lead you to a lot of essential data right at your fingertip in just a couple clicks. And when I think of this, I think of if you're doing an application, a USDA application of some kind, and they're looking for information on, what's your most recent population data? What's your median household income? What's your poverty rate? Well, all of that is right here. The default is to the population tab. You have these different tabs, and I'll discuss this momentarily, but we'll start here with population, and it gives you the 2010 population. And if you were to go to age, it would give you median age, income, it would give you the most recent median household income, the poverty, the most recent poverty rate. So all that basic information is very simple clicks away. But the other great thing about this is that it's sort of like this onion that you can peel, that if you want to go deeper, it presents you some opportunities to do that. For example, okay, so this is 2010 population data here. But let's say, well, how did my population change from 2000 to 2010? Well, they've got the Census 2010 demographic data file right down here. You can click on that and it'll automatically take you to it. If you wanted to see what the Census Bureau's estimates, population estimates are for, say, 2014 or 2013, they've got those estimates right here. So you can get that additional information. Likewise, for median household income, go here and click income. And you can then go to you can see it and then go to an older data set that can give it to you for the 2000 census, or again any of these other topic areas. I do want to point out, though, that for business and industry, when you click on that, you will get the number of establishments you have in the counties, and you'll get then a list of other data sources to give you more detailed information. Economic data at the sub-county level, generally for rural areas in particular, is not very good because a lot of data gets suppressed. The Census Bureau doesn't want to release data that reveals particular companies. So economic data at the sub-county level for rural counties is not helpful by and large. So, but when you look at the business and industry tab, one of the selections you can make is for county business patterns, and in the list that you will have there, that's a very good data source to go at, and I think you may be working with that in your exercise, and it's great because the data will come up, but it'll have a list of previous years right next on the left side. So you could look at 2013, but if you wanted to go and look at 2005 and compare, you can easily do that. So the American Fact Finder is just a terrific portal. It's been up now for a couple years, and the Census Bureau has gotten much, much better about making data easy to get to. And the data almanac will give you a whole bunch of other sites that I think are will also be helpful to you. So that pretty much concludes my presentation today. If you want to contact me with any questions or comments between now and when you come next week, Uh, Here's my email address. There's my phone number. I'm going to be out a good part of the day on Thursday, um, but generally I'm available up until when you get here Tuesday. So just email me or give me a call. I'm happy to walk through any of this with you in any detail you would like. But you've also got a good opportunity to learn from Alfred Garshong, who's the associate for research in GIS here at the center, who works with me, who is going to be part of the Ready class. And you can also contact Alfred before the session starts, or just pull him aside and ask him really hard questions when you meet him next Tuesday or Wednesday. I think you'll find him very, very helpful. He'll be a great addition to the class this year. And with that, I will conclude. I wish you all the best. Again, feel free to contact me, and traveling mercies when you come to the Rural Center next week. All the best. Bye bye.